So you've been experiencing Amanda's work in the space today, this structure outside. So Amanda, tell us about this work, and then in the theme of belonging, sort of how does your work connect with that theme?
So John, Vanessa, and I were brainstorming ways to transform this space for a fresh live in a meaningful way. And I proposed adapting Beyond Curie, as Ayana mentioned, these portraits of badass ladies in STEM to a human scale structure. And I think the structure itself represents how strong we can be when we support each other as women in STEM. And there are some boxes that are cantilevered. They kind of look like they might fall off, and that signifies...
I can't imagine what that could possibly signify.
But our position...
It's a little bit precarious sometimes.
Precarious is right. Our position as women in STEM can be precarious sometimes. And I didn't cover all the boxes because I wanted to show that there's room for this next generation of STEM, next generation of women in STEM to really make their mark. But as I was thinking about it, so often young women, and especially young women of color, don't believe that the STEM fields are open to them. And the process of creating the structure in a way mirrors their struggle. You start to question yourself. There are lots of unforeseen challenges. People tell you no, but step by step, with the help of friends and some resourceful thinking, you get there.
Wonderful. So we chatted recently about our backgrounds and similarities, but we've also both worked really hard to get beyond these sort of disciplinary boundaries. You don't do neuroscience anymore. I'm no longer counting fish. And we don't just write papers either. There's a lot of our work that's out in the world and engaging people. So I'd love to hear you share how you sort of broadened the work that you do beyond the specific that you were trained for.
Absolutely. So science for me was never a silo. I always found that it was connected to all of my other interests, dance, design, art. And I also realized that...
Amanda was a ballerina in her other life.
My other life.
I'm here to blow up your spot and shout you out.
Thank you. I also found that my fellow artists didn't really see science the same way that I did, and that really encouraged me to share this wonder with them. I also think that historically, we've focused on celebrating the men in science, and when I started Beyond Curie, there were only a couple of people who were really shouting out these badass ladies. So it was more that I saw a need, and I knew I had the skills to get their stories out there. So it was less about kind of broadening and more about, if not me, then who?
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think just from the perspective of marine biology, it's this like super specific field. And my evolution in that space was like, it's actually not about the fish, it's about the people. So how do we tell the stories of the ocean in the ways that engage people? And that's always been a challenge, but absolutely, I agree that the way that you succeed at that is by involving art, involving communities, involving children. And that's something that I really enjoy seeing about your work as well. And I think in this theme of belonging, I'd love to hear you share a little bit more about what you shared with me just recently about how, because you have all of these different skills and you're trying to weave them all together into the work that you do now, how can you possibly belong anywhere? And is that something that drives you at all, that desire?
I think I'm not necessarily driven by this sense of belonging. I grew up as a little Asian girl in the South, and there weren't many other people who looked like me. So I was in many ways forced to forge an identity on my own. And obviously, we all feel best when we're with our people, like here at this event. But we can't always find that. It's difficult. And I also think that I love being the catalyst. I love being the person to introduce others to new ideas and experiences. And I think that drives me more.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're kind of like bucking the trend of belonging. I think because my work is so interdisciplinary, it's not something that motivates me, because if it did, I would just be bummed out all the time. Because when you're trying to push the boundaries and connect the dots, you sort of end up floating in space when you're leaping for like the next ring. But at the same time, I think the work that both we do can inform the way that we think about belonging and community, because I know that while belonging may not drive either of us, we both care deeply about community. So I'd love to hear you share, just from your scientific background, what does neuroscience have to tell us about belonging and community?
Well, Jamil definitely told us a little bit about it already, but neuroscience basically tells us what we've all known intuitively for a long time, that a sense of belonging and feeling cared for makes for better health. So when the brain perceives social isolation, it's similar to when we perceive a threat of physical harm. So this triggers a fight or flight response, and repeated triggering of this causes inflammation, and it really gives us what chronic stress does. But on the flip side, when we feel a sense of belonging, when we feel cared for, the brain releases dopamine and oxytocin, which is known to mitigate inflammation in the body and really make for better health.
I wish that that's what marine biology had to teach us about this. I guess like I'm gonna take the privilege of like not looking like a hippie to say some really hippie stuff, and like you'll maybe take it seriously, which is I think what marine biology has to teach us is about ecosystems and about interconnectedness and about how we can't separate ourselves from nature, even though we live in New York City, and we often forget that, for example, New York City is on the coast and it's an ocean city, and it arose because we have this amazing natural harbor, and we have whales living in our harbor and seahorses under piers in the Hudson, and the water's cleaner than it's been in 100 years, and like our actions as New Yorkers affect the water and what lives in it, and just the connectedness of everything. And so when I think about belonging and community, I often, when humans are not providing an adequate model for what that could look like, I often turn to nature and think about other ways that we can structure society and community. It's almost like in this era, I find myself reading more science fiction and looking more to nature for models, because we need to be inspired to think beyond what the current state of affairs is. So speaking of the current state of affairs, we all know that in the STEM fields, there really aren't very many women of color. But I also think there is this opportunity for our backgrounds, our individual diversity in its many facets, to be a real asset. And so one of the things that I've done is work a lot with Caribbean communities. And we have a photo here. That's me doing my PhD research after I stopped counting fish and realized what I really need to do is talk to fishermen. If I wanted to understand ocean conservation, I needed to understand the people. And so I spent hours and hours interviewing hundreds of fishermen on the side of the road, just like bringing folding chairs and a cooler full of beer and being like, tell me what's happening? What are you seeing? What's the problem? How can we fix it? Like, you've thought about this for much longer than I have. And so bringing the local folks into the discussion of science, and then ending up starting the Blue Halo initiative in Barbuda, and again ending up like interrupting Domino's games on the side of the road and being like, tell me, if you were going to zone your ocean, what would that look like? Where would you draw the boundaries? How can we work together? How can we integrate the science about where the coral reefs are and the mangroves and the fish to really come up with a plan so you can use your ocean but without using it up? And like, let's dream up this future together. And then you can finish your Domino's game. And so I think all that is to say, if you come from a different background, if you come from a background that's similar to the communities where you're working, I think there is so much more that we can achieve because you have these connections. People think that they can actually be a part of it. And I know from environmental work, you do a lot of work on sustainability too, that there's this really amazing untapped resource, which is that people of color, brown and black folks in particular, pull much higher on support for environmental issues than their white counterparts. So not involving them in the solution is like, do you want to win or not? Like, even if you're a racist jerk, you should involve all these people if you want to win. So I think I've found that my identity is an asset in having these roadside conversations with fishermen and in doing environmental work. And I'd love to hear how your background has been an asset to you in your work.
I think when we go into communities, establishing trust is key. Oftentimes people can be hesitant to partner if they don't feel like you can possibly understand their experience. So being able to traverse these different fields has been helpful in that there's just more trust established, and that makes for better solutions and better partnerships.
Yeah, the word trust is so key. And you have to stick around for a while to build that trust. You can't just like show up and especially, I mean, because even though I'm half Jamaican, I'm like not dark enough to count. And so they're like, but who are you really? And so there's all these other layers of what that is and how you build that trust, and of who you are, and like, how can you bring your whole self to this work? So I know that's something that you work really hard at, like integrating all those pieces. And it strikes me that maybe there's this opportunity that if we allow people to bring their hobbies sort of into their professional life, that it might make more space for people to feel welcome in the sciences. So tell us about that. How does that work for you?
I think oftentimes people think that science is super serious and it's done by serious scientists. But as we were discussing before, actually a lot of inventions, a lot of discoveries have come from non-scientists and really result from play and just messing around. But beyond that, I think that a lot of women in STEM really try to hide their more feminine hobbies, like knitting or baking, because they don't want the men in their labs to perceive them as homemakers rather than, legitimate, serious scientists. And I wish they wouldn't hide that because it can be such an asset. I talked to a mathematician the other day, and she told me that her hours and hours growing up knitting have actually kind of leveled her up in this field of knot theory. And she can actually visualize these knots in 3D because she's just done it so much. And she's got this superpower, and it's amazing.
That's so cool. So you came here straight from teaching some science, working with some young girls. Tell us about that. What were you doing today?
I did. Are my hands blue? Hopefully not. But for the past couple of months, I've been running a little science club at Tompkins Square Middle School. And Tompkins is a Title I school, which means it serves more underprivileged neighborhoods. And even if these young women are excited about science, they might not have the support at home or resources to really pursue science. Every week we do experiments like popsicle stick chain reactions, making slime, making Coke explode. And it's about having fun, but along the way, these young women learn about energy transformation and chemistry, and it really helps to have them feel like they can make science with their two hands.
So yes, we both care very deeply about this education piece. I started a kids' summer camp in Barbuda to teach about the ocean. And we both do it in a way that focuses on underserved communities. So tell me about how you came to this realization that social justice and science education were related.
I think people believe that treatments and research just happen. And a moment last year when one of my good friends, Abby, was suffering from an autoimmune condition really kind of changed my mind about how we really need to make science more accessible. She was just having a lot of trouble with this condition. The symptoms were debilitating, and I started looking for papers on how to make her feel a little bit better. There was just shockingly little. Because it's not a high-profile kind of condition or disease like breast cancer or Alzheimer's. And it really takes a lot of investment from taxpayers, from policymakers, to really make treatments like this happen, make this research possible.
So I have one last question for you, and it's super selfish because you're watching me have a meeting with Amanda. And it's that, so I just started as a visiting scholar at Pioneer Works, this art and culture space in Brooklyn, and they have a science program. And so I'm supposed to now figure out how to integrate science into art, and obviously from the lens of like, how do we save the ocean? So do you have any advice for me, and what should I do?
Well, first of all,
it's just too hard to schedule a call. I'm sorry.
well, first of all, this is so exciting. They're so lucky to have you. But I would encourage you to create experiences that you don't necessarily think will work 100% right away. So we're used to, and we fall back on creating experiences for people who are like us. It's just easier. People who are well-educated, listen to NPR, believe science is important. But I would encourage you to reach beyond that community and try to make other communities, as you've done in the Caribbean, involved and make them feel like they belong.
I will take that to heart for sure. Thank you.